Welcome to the third session of Aarhus Symposium 2015. I really hope that you enjoyed the Arla break. Now, please welcome the moderator for this year's debate session. He's news presenter at TV2 Denmark. It is Paul Erik Skammelsen.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And then I can welcome you to this year's debates on climate and technology. We're only a few weeks away from COP21 in Paris. It has been called the best chance of a comprehensive agreement on climate, global climate agreement since COP15 in Copenhagen, the famous, some would say, infamous COP we had there. Scientists, political leaders, a lot of others are calling this urgent. Do we have the leadership to get there, to get an agreement to do something about climate change? Do we have the ideas? Do we have the technology to get there without having to give up too much of our very comfortable lives? People can actually go out and see climate change, experience climate change. I don't think any of us is in doubt that something is going on, maybe in this part of the world, some would say for the better, but we don't really change the way that we live. What does it take for us to feel this sense of urgency? Those are some of the questions that I hope we'll get through today. I hope you guys will ask a lot of questions on Slido as well, and I hope it really works. But let me welcome the debate panel, Connie Hedegaard, Simon Giles, and Andreas Roepstorff. Connie knows this topic better than most as a former EU Commissioner for Climate, now engaged in the leading climate foundations. Simon Giles from Accenture knows a lot about smart cities, and also how to get from a great ideas to maybe living in a sustainable city. It's not that far away if we want to, he told me in a break here. Andreas is professor in cognition and communications, cognition, communication and culture here in Aarhus. How do we make people feel this sense of urgency is one of the questions. I'll get the debate started by giving you all 3 minutes each, and let me start with you, Connie. What kind of leadership, because this conference is about leadership, what kind of leadership does it take to get a comprehensive agreement in Paris?
3 weeks from now? Wow.
You have 3 minutes.
Well, I think that first it takes what is on its way. That not only climate and environment ministers and the climate and environment sort of groups, that also finance ministers, heads of states, prime ministers understand that this is for real, that they have to do something about it. That's extremely important, that this is not a silo thing, that this is a cross-cutting thing. And they have to understand what now more than 150 countries have understood, that they have to set up their targets for the longer term. How do you want country A, B, C, D? What is your plan? What is your target? Where do you go? More than 150 countries have now, prior to Paris, said this is what we will be doing. That's a very good sign. Then I think what is also needed when we are talking about leadership is to get a price on carbon, a new way of thinking our economy so that we price resources, energy, climate, things that we do not want people to use more of. It must come with a price tag. But there, I'm sorry to disappoint you, I cannot see a global carbon price coming out of Paris. Why? Because it's one of those areas where the parties, as it's called, the countries, simply cannot agree. But I think they will agree something. Will it be ambitious enough? No. But I think it will mark, and that's where the leadership thing comes in, it will mark that the world is now changing trajectory, the world is getting its act together, getting serious about these things, and then final point, beside the agreement itself, there will be a package, an action package, divestment, changing investment patterns in this world, Subsidies, getting away from subsidizing fossil fuels sounds like a very good idea, doesn't it? If we don't want fossil fuels, why are we subsidizing it 5 times the thing we are subsidizing renewables with? So some of these things will come at the site, so to speak. And if those action things for cities, business, other things, if that together is big enough, then I do think that we will get some feeling that our leaders have understood the message.
So we'll remember Paris differently than Copenhagen, you
I hope so. Having said that, and I have to say that, what Paris is building on is what was agreed in Copenhagen, on the 2 degrees, on the 100 billion and many other things. So, I mean, in Denmark we want to bash ourselves very much, and for good reasons, but the new thing is that China and the US actually have started to show leadership. That is the big difference compared to Copenhagen.
Now, Simon, do we have the technology to move on?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think technology is the problem. We have the technologies are in play. The issue is, and they have been for some time, the issue is the political will there, and is the business will there, and are the business incentives there for the private sector to be able to engage? Do we see the business model innovation that is required to make sure that it's adopted? And will we see enough of an incentive package put together at COP21 to incent mayors of devolved government to really act? And actually what I find interesting is that there seems to be a disconnect between the COP process and what is happening on the ground in cities. In reality, over 80% of emissions are responsible for cities are responsible for over 80% of the emissions. And therefore, getting the problem solved will be right in the wheelhouse of city mayors and city administrators. And they are thinking about strategy execution more than they are about strategy. And ultimately, the mayors will be the recipients of targets and strategies that are put in place at COP21 and post-COP21. But they have already come to that conclusion. You know, the most ambitious carbon targets have been set by mayors themselves. The question is, what are the levers that they hold? The biggest change that I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, though, is the mentality of mayors and chief executives has shifted away from a focus purely on mitigation to mitigation adaptation. So where historically the focus was really hard on mitigating climate change through either energy efficiency in the built environment or transition from hydrocarbon mobility to electromobility, the focus now has been split between that, which is still ongoing, and a focus on climate resilience and effectively adaptation. Because whether it's 2 degrees, 4 degrees, or 6 degrees, we're now at a position where we better be in a position where the cities are resilient to any of the climate changes going to be in play. And the implication of that is that the focus of the administrations in the cities are split.
So those cities are already feeling that sense of urgency.
Yeah, because it's right in their strategic agenda. You know, if you're the mayor of New York, you'll remember Hurricane Sandy like it was yesterday. And not only that, your voters remember Hurricane Sandy like it was yesterday. And I think that was a real wake-up call. And you know, the 100 Resilient Cities program that was set up by Rockefeller Foundation really took off post-Sandy because they realized that there was a real demand for understanding about what urban resilience meant and what were the types of mitigation actions that could be put in place and adaptation activities that could be put in place in cities.
And Sandy was, maybe that was even one of the things that somehow affected how people voted. Andreas, we know something is happening, yet we're not actually behaving any other way, most of us, than we used to. I mean, what does it take, what kind of leadership does it take to make people move themselves?
So maybe it's worth just to go one step back and say, well, what is the problem, right? So the problem in a way is technological and it's also social, and it has to do with particular processes that were both social and technological, particular ways of using resources, particular ways of organizing ourselves. And the solution has to be seen as that as well. It's both technological and it's social. And once we maybe think a little bit about what is the problem, then economists and others have been talking about these problems of tragedies of the commons. It's something that you have in common, but no one seems to take care of it, and if unhappy circumstances happen, you know, they basically, stuff gets overgrazed, things gets degraded. This might be how we should phrase it. But we also know something about what does it take actually to protect something for a long term. One thing that's critical is that the time perspective is long. If you have to share something but you only meet once, you know, it's really difficult to come up with a solution that leaves something intact there. But if you work together over time, and if you know that the perspective you have is maybe not just your own lifetime, but like growing a forest, something that goes into generation, people can build different strategies for dealing with it. So having a long perspective is important. And secondly, recognizing something as sacred, recognizing something as, you can say, getting outside of an ordinary sphere of interaction seems also to be critical. We know quite a lot about what goes on when people deal with the environment from all sorts of cultures, from all sorts of places. And it seems that, of course, when you discuss the environment, there is a critical issue about what is out there. You could call it the ontology. And there's a critical issue about how do we understand which is out there, right? And in a way, a lot of the debate has been about that. It has been about realizing that actually we live in this kind of shared world. We live in a world where burning off a lot of carbon dioxide that has been built up over millions of years have immediate consequences. And we are starting to understand how we can calculate that. But if I can continue, because what seems to be the most interesting is also going with that is an ethics and an aesthetics. It's really also about understanding what seems to be the right way to act in the situation, even if you cannot know the full consequences. So what we might be important to think of is it's about understanding that relating to this environment is a common responsibility, and that shame and guilt should be involved in it if you don't deal properly with it. And
shame and guilt?
Shame and guilt. Just as you should feel pride when you do well about it. I mean, this is how the social world is built. It's not only built on figures and statistics, it's built on shame and guilt and pride. But that takes you to realize it as something that is important, that you can feel that you attach to, and where your actions have consequences. And I think this is what's happening now. We take shared responsibility, and it becomes about shared guilt and pride.
Shame and guilt, I want Connie to, in a moment, address that as a former politician. But first, we actually have some questions for you guys. A couple of questions that you can vote on in this climate debate. What do you think is the main driver for consumers adopting a green behavior? Is it economic incentives? Oh, there it is. Self-expression or environmental concerns? Was that one guy? I think this is rigged.
Right.
Continue voting, then we get the shame and guilt. I mean, should politicians to convince people be shaming them and making them feel guilty? It sounds so old-fashioned.
No, but that I basically agree very much, because, I mean, we have the natural sciences. The scientific case is made. Then, for a long time, we have been focusing on the economics. If we want business and people to start acting different tomorrow from what they did yesterday, we need to take care that they are not treated as economic idiots. That's why the economic side is incredibly important, and that we sort of get the price of polluting included in whatever we do. But I am absolutely in agreement with Andreas that even if we had the most perfect economic system we could think of, there would still be a huge component, because it will also take our ethics. I mean, what the Pope is doing right now to talk about how you and I consume, the buy and throw out culture, the carelessness with which we sort of handle nature, things like that.
But the Pope may be a person who has sort of a longer perspective in his thinking than most of us.
And that might be very good in that sense, because we have maybe had a too short perspective. In this sort of very liberalistic paradigm, I can buy something, I can consume something, thus I do this. And where is it that we lost that there are other values as well? And I think it's extremely important not only to talk about behavior, which politicians normally would hate, because they hate to tell people what to do for very good reasons, but I think to have this behavioral science, the social sciences, also to come into the equation is extremely important, because we have the natural sciences, the economic sciences, but we need the social sciences, the knowledge about what makes people start behaving differently without politicians having to tell people, you must do that, but you must not do that. We need that other component.
Let's take a look at this. Economic incentives, environmental concerns, self-expression, economic incentives. Simon? You agree with this? I mean, the majority doesn't always have to be right.
No, I mean, I think...
No, that was wrong.
I think the choices are mutually exclusive or collectively exhaustive. That's a slight problem. And if I was to talk about incentive, not just purely economic incentives, then I definitely think incentives more broadly, both positive and negative, so shame and praise are important. And just coming back to that point as well, and why I think it's about more than economic incentives, is that when we set up business models and social structures to deal with questions of climate change mitigation, it's not just about the technology that is applied or the rational economics that are applied. It's about understanding the ethnography and anthropology of communities and human behavior. It's about understanding how people make decisions. And the trouble with economics, traditional economics, is that there's an inherent assumption that people are rational actors. And in reality, most decisions that people are making are broadly emotional and are within the context of a social interaction. And therefore, we need to understand that anthropology and ethnography, and we need to design our structures accordingly.
Or solar panels on their roofs because, it's good business.
So certainly you can create economic incentives to make people make the decisions that you want them to make, whether that is putting in place fossil fuel subsidies or whether it's putting in place renewable energy subsidies. Clearly that's a fairly blunt instrument for making decision, and you only have to look at the experience of Germany and the German decision to put in place solar subsidies and how big an impact and how blunt an instrument that was in changing human behavior. But the reality is that we need to be more nuanced. And one of the topics that we discussed in the earlier presentation I made was this idea that design is critical. It's not just about the economic incentives and the business model, but it's the whole design of the way that people consume products and services and how that integrates with their daily life, which is important. And from a technology perspective, it's not about how we engineer the solutions and the economic engineering. It's about understanding human-centered design and human behavior. And we need to have much more of a rapprochement between the social sciences and good design and economics and engineering.
I want to get down into that a little bit later because we have one more question for you guys that you can vote on. But incentives, economic incentives, if I should use a negative word for it, it would be, shame, guilt, and greed. Doesn't that count as well?
I think economic incentives are really, really important. And the whole kind of introduction of the solar system is a really wonderful case of it. And it's actually amazing how easy it was to get people to invest a lot of their money on putting solar panels on their roofs. If you really calculate the economic model and the uncertainty to it, it may not be a good deal. But I think what happens if you have these things on your roof is not just kind of the economic value of it, but every day you come home and the sun shines, there's kind of the joy of it producing electricity. It kind of feels nice in summer to take a warm bath that you know is coming from the sun instead. So these things are economic, but they also tie into all sorts of other areas as well. And it allows you to talk to your neighbors about, what's at stake here? Why are we doing it? It's also about economy, but economy is just one of the measures that keep people together. It's a really important one. But economy is always embedded in other things, and the temporal perspective is what's more important. Are you doing this with a perspective of 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months, a year, your lifetime, your kid's lifetime? That really changes what's rational in the situation. And once you can frame it at a longer time perspective, people behave differently, and if you calculate the optimization function, it looks differently.
So I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but still, if you can make a bit of money and do good at the same time,
good,
then it works. Economic incentives, Connie. What should we use in your view?
No, but we should price carbon. We should price resources. We should, when we sort of consider what is the cost of doing A instead of B. We should not just look at the cost, we should also look at the running cost and the life cycle cost. You know, another way of factoring in co-benefits. That's again relating to the silo thinking. If we only say, oh, this is something for climate, well, if it's in our cities, maybe it's not just for climate, maybe it means better, this tool we then use, maybe it means cleaner air, and it means better transportation, and you know, to be better at factoring in the co-benefits. I think that means a lot. And then on the behavioral side, I think that a lot of research also shows when it's big challenges like this, and I want to do something about it, I'll become aware, I want to do something about it, it helps if I do not feel I'm the only one. I mean, if I'm sort of part of a community, I understand that the many behavioral scientists say that can sort of help people speed up action. So it's also about creating this momentum where we feel we are part of a community doing this.
Then let's take a question here, because it actually fits right into this. The top one, A Battle of the Economists, Professor Michael Swar stated that what is needed is a global agreed tax on CO2. Global agreed tax?
Sure.
Sure?
That would be useful,
No?
absolutely.
Yeah. I thought you were shaking your head.
No, that would be useful.
But sorry, Pauliek, the problem of course is that there is not such a body that can say, here is a global tax, UN decides a global tax tomorrow. I mean, that's just not how it works. But maybe we can have sort of a global price on CO2 evolving. Right now, China has said they want to make a national price on carbon from next 5-year plan. More than 20 states in the US have it. In the European Union, we have it. So this vision of having a global way of pricing
great
is
idea,
not
but
that
not
far off.
realistic. I mean, even in this well-organized country, tax collection doesn't seem to be working right now.
I think there's one other interesting element to this, and I'm no macroeconomist, but I'm guessing that this is a pretty regressive tax. Because if you look at a fairly standard flat rate CO2 tax, it's going to impact the poorest people disproportionately to wealthy people. And you know, if you're right on the breadline and you're burning wood to cook your meals, are you going to be taxing the wood that people are collecting from the field? You know, how progressive versus regressive would a flat rate CO2 tax be?
Did it say flat rate?
It didn't, but I'm guessing that any tax is going to be pretty progressive.
But that might be where leadership comes in, right? So if we think of leadership, it's really a technology of the social. The social is about how we organize ourselves, how you orient towards values and choices, etc. The leadership, in the sense of standing forward with a good example or moving first, might be what it takes here, and it's probably not the poorest countries that should move further there, where it's really kind of people who can do these things without it really affecting much of their lives that needs to be doing those kind of movements. And I think this is what leadership is about in this case here. It can be people, it can be businesses, it can be countries. In interesting ways, we see that countries currently have a relatively short time frame, right? Politicians know that they're only in the game for 4 years, whereas people are in it for a lifetime, and some companies seems really to think in a much longer perspective. So leadership is about taking these actions, also if you are not sure that the economic benefits are there in the moment, because that changes things.
Now, in a country where we like to have referenda, let's take another one here. From whom do you think a green behavior primarily should emerge in order to be successful? Consumers, companies, government. Can we get that one up? Let's just see. Wow, it's just looks like the other one. No, it doesn't anymore. I'm going to throw this one to you while the vote is still going on. This is the exit poll right now.
I'm not sure I agree with the premise of the question. I think the reality is that all three parties need to be collaborating in response to climate change. I don't think that the onus falls on any one of those three. And in fact, if it doesn't get proportionately allocated each of the three partners, then we won't be successful in tackling climate change. So I'm not sure I agree with the premise. However, what I would say is that convergence between public sector requirements and private sector requirements are absolutely critical. And I think there has been that disconnect historically where the government and the private sector have been talking at odds about incentives. In the case of companies, it's very clear what the decision-making criteria are for businesses. And in fact, it's legally enforced in most countries that companies have to do what is in the best interest of their shareholders from a shareholder value perspective. So most executives don't have any other, well, they have a legal requirement to do what is in the best interest of their shareholders. So if governments understand that, then they need to understand that the economic incentives need to be put in place to make the private sector act, and then they will jump.
And what's your take on this? I mean, there's not a majority of anything here, but there's a plurality of consumers coming in first.
Yeah, well,
these guys are consumers.
Consumers are close to ourselves, so what that suggests is we have kind of responsibility for it. But I think what's really important and interesting here is that actually businesses seems to be able to do something and get a lot of stuff out of it. I thought Mads Nipper's presentation was really interesting in the sense of saying, well, pumps are maybe our business case, but we're really in the water circulation stuff. This is what we do. And once we start thinking about how we fit into a network of technology and people and take that larger perspective, suddenly very different business models become obvious. So it seems to me that also for businesses, kind of really analyzing what's at stake in this situation.
But do you see those business models coming up? Do you think it's changing?
Well, I mean,
they're in it for their shareholders?
But there might be in it for the shareholders, but if we look at the story about Grundfos, right, it was something about not just looking at the energy efficiency of every pump, but also trying to think through how would our pump fit into a larger picture. And once you know that, there's actually something that can go out there. So in terms of driving the technological changes, businesses might need to front load this in order to come up with those solutions that can also be good for the company.
Connie, I mean, we don't know how representative this group here are of people in general, but isn't that good news that they put consumers at top? If they think of themselves, if we as individuals think of ourselves as the ones that should be doing something.
Yeah.
Isn't that good news?
Yeah, I think it's good news, and also that it's more or less one third, because we need all of it.
But you don't believe it, you don't believe it.
No, but I think it's fine. I would only hope that the politicians then would see this, because there is a tendency to sort of expect that the citizens do not want to pay anything for this, or do not want to change anything. And I mean, if we take this seriously, people do want to be part of the solution. So maybe the political leaders should be a bit more audacious when it comes to actually expecting something to people, for instance, to pay for their pollution. People are not that stupid. So again, and I agree very much with Andreas, we must have more longer-term thinking, longer-term investments, longer-term thinking also in politics, and then, of course, also in media, because if media only wants the politicians to think for today and tomorrow, then we will never get to the longer-term thinking.
We're mostly thinking
24-hour
news cycles, right? They're already feeling the guilt, it seems. But regarding companies, you were already moving into, we have the technology, but they don't sell it the right way, they don't design it the right way. Try to explain that point here.
So I guess the point that I'm making is that the technology is there, but what we've seen is that this isn't predominantly a technology problem, it's a design problem. And the reason is that in many organizations, especially organizations like myself, my own organization, we tend to hire in economists and engineers to design solutions to these types of problems. And yet, if the issue is that consumer behavior needs to change, then actually business model innovation and design innovation is what is required, because we need to understand how people are interacting with their technology as communities and as individuals, so that we can create more nuanced incentives and decisions about the way they commute to work or the way that they consume energy in their home. Now, if I really want to understand the way that individuals or community segments interact or make decisions about commuting, then I need both to collect information and data, analyze that data, and then be much more agile in the way that I design the processes, testing whether changing a business model or changing pricing structures or changing the way that I structure the semantics of the semantics of a piece of paper that is a set of instructions to do something
but are you also
will
getting at
change
that
the way that somebody will make the behavior.
You need more Steve Jobs, people who develop the technology, but they also design it in a way that makes me feel good about, having it right here on stage.
Yeah, and
in my hand.
Yeah,
Tesla.
Elon Musk is a great example. In fact, I was talking just the other day about Tesla X to somebody. So recently, Elon Musk did the kind of Steve Jobs announcement of the new Tesla X SUV. And what's kind of interesting about it is that it gives you some small pointers to the way that mobility will evolve, or we think mobility is going to evolve in the future. So two technologies were particularly interesting. With Tesla X is the new SUV version of the Tesla electric car. There are two technologies I thought were very interesting. One is that they designed it with falcon wing doors. Right? So basically the back doors of the car go up, and they have sensors in them so that if you're near another car, it won't open, or if there's a person standing by the car, it won't open. The second technology was a robotic snake, which is effectively holds the charging arm for the Tesla, and it will use AI to automatically, or artificial intelligence, to automatically dock with the charging point on your car, so there's no manual intervention. Now, at face value, you could think that those technologies are simply making it easier for a consumer to buy that car. But what it's actually doing is pointing to the future of electromobility, because Elon Musk is thinking about, if I was to create a fleet of Tesla X's, what are the technologies, if I was to make this self-driving, that would make it easier for that car to be able to go and pick up a customer without a driver and bring it back to a fleet center and recharge on its own? Now, what Musk is saying is, the future of mobility isn't car ownership of hydrocarbon cars in the city. It's about mobility as a service in electric vehicles.
So if we need, in this case, disruptive technology to change people's behavior, to give us other choices, you say it's already there. I mean, Connie, you're also, both the political level, you meet a lot of the movers and shakers, also regarding companies. Are you optimistic? Simon is optimistic. That's how I hear.
But I think that a lot of things are happening out in the companies, I have to say. And it's dawning also on the CEOs of the top thousands big companies of this world. They understand this. It's not philanthropy. It's not because of a special ethics or anything. It's also because they can see what kind of risk will be coming to their assets. So they understand that to plan for the future, to take the right decisions for the future, they have to invest more in innovation. They have to do things differently. And yes, I think that there are really many good guys doing the right stuff. I then also think...
But it moves really slowly.
Exactly.
I mean, Tesla is being sold in Denmark.
That's the front runners, but then we have the bulk. And in order to get the bulk moving as well, that is exactly why we still need some kind of international framework around these things, so that people in a competitive world can see, okay, I dare to invest now, but I know that my competitor, he also has to address this problem. And that's the added value in having an international framework around these things.
I'll get back to those questions up there in a moment, but just, Andreas, the thing about technology, design, they make us feel good.
Yeah. I think Simon is absolutely right. Design is crucial. What is design doing? Design is precisely about matching up technology with the social. This is what design is all about. And with design comes also not just, the ethics of doing right or the pride and shame. It also comes the aesthetics. It's about, it's cool to be cool and it's smart to be smart. And it might be cooler to ride a SUV that is powered by solar energy than one that only goes 5 kilometers a liter. And this is the framing that kind of needs to go in there.
As well.
It may be cheaper, that depends on the taxation system, but in the long run, this is where we will all be going. So I think design is critical, because what design shows us are different ways we can live our lives. And it also shows us ways that connects not just to clear economic rationales, but also to ideas about what's right, what's beautiful, how should we evaluate what others are doing. And this is what design can do. And this is also about innovation and possibilities for businesses. So that's why they ought to look out for those things.
So make it trendy.
Yes.
Now, let's go to some of the questions here. There's a top one. It's been there for a long time. A large part of American and Chinese policymakers denies the existence of global warming, I guess it should be. Is that not a huge problem dealing with the issue? You know those guys.
Yeah, what do we do when Donald Trump becomes the president of the free world? Yes, of course.
Well,
that
at least he
is-
might be a disruptor.
That is a big challenge, of course, and has been. But I would say I'm not that sure about the Chinese political leadership. I think they get it for many reasons that I cannot go into here, but also for pollution reasons and resource reasons and many reasons. It's not just about climate, it's about many things. But I would not say that there is a barrier when it comes to the Chinese leadership understanding why they must pursue a circular economy and another kind of economy. But of course, we have been struggling for many years and paying the price for the US not being able to move. Now we have an American president who gets this, who really wants to do something. A little bit late, some of us think, but now he is moving, and that's extremely good.
But he's
he
moving on his
cannot-
own. He's not.
moving on
Congress
his
is not
own.
with him.
He cannot get it through Congress, and that of course means that when we come to the next American elections, whatever is adopted in Paris, there is no absolute certainty that a new American administration will stand behind that, and that you will hear more of in the coming weeks in conjunction with Paris, because that is a question of trust. Do we really believe that the US is now moving, no matter who will form the next administration?
But Simon, we see a lot of American cities moving, American states moving on their own. Maybe we should just think, well, let Donald Trump and the others have their debates.
Well, I think there's a presupposition in this question that policy is only driven at a national level, and that's clearly not the case. I mean, there are policy makers at the subnational level, the regional level, and at the city level that are just as important. And actually, when it comes down to action on the ground, often policy that is made at a city level is more impactful in terms of challenging carbon emissions, right? Decisions about adopting electromobility in New York City is a decision of Mayor Bloomberg, or the ex-Mayor Bloomberg, now de Blasio, right? So, we mustn't just think that what happens in COP will set the global sustainability and climate change agenda for the coming years. Not only that, when it comes to the actual execution on the ground, the people that sit in corporate America and corporate China have a very different perspective to what's happening at the national political level. And in my experience, many of those are much more committed to addressing the questions of climate change
So we
mitigation
shouldn't
and
care so much
adaptation.
about Paris.
So yes, policy is important at the national level, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Subnational policy making and corporate policy is as important, if not more important, from my perspective.
Then can a city be, if I may quote Ronald Reagan, sort of a shining city on the hill
Yes, I think so.
that we all look up to, and then we move that direction?
I think definitely. And I think one of the reasons that you can say there has been the climate denial at various levels also has to do with problems in imagining what could an alternative future look like, right? It's kind of, if you don't really know how you're going to deal with the situation, it's easy to go into the details of how many degrees are we talking about, how many percentages are at stake. But the moment that you can actually see that there are different ways we can organize ourselves, they don't seem to hamper our lives in many ways, they might be more attractive, then that kind of technical discussion becomes almost obsolete. And therefore, precisely, I think local communities can make a huge effort in showing that actually life can be differently. Why do we need to be stuck in that particular way? And therefore, the local initiatives are crucial.
Is it then important that it's cities, attractive cities? You were talking design, and so attractive
Sure.
cities. It's Berlin, it's New York, it's San Francisco, maybe Copenhagen that should move.
Or it's Samsø, right? I mean,
It's
if you
Samsø.
look objectively at
Yeah.
it, Samsø, a small island off the west coast having no trees left, should not be the most attractive place in the world. And yet they really got together and formulated kind of a vision. I don't know whether the details of their energy balance work, but it has really created something for a lot of people all over the world to think about. And Samsø is not, objectively speaking, the most attractive place in the world, right? Although I
That's
love to
nice.
go there. Yeah, it's nice. But it's nice because people want to do something with their place. And this is what niceness is about.
But this also goes to how far one country can go. For a long time in this country, we've been debating we should be ahead. I would say a lot of governments, several governments have said that. They've discussed how far ahead. And you've often heard from businesses, Danish businesses, that we can get too far ahead, be too green.
Yeah, of course, you can be front runner, and if nobody is following, then of course you end up having a problem. On the other hand, you could say, and that's why we have done this very much at the European level in Europe, saying that if not we are the front runners, who will be?
Yeah.
I mean, the price of renewables are going down like this now. Solar like this, wind like this. Why? Because somebody started it. But I would agree, of course, you cannot be there if nobody is following, but maybe you can be there, and maybe you can be wise when you have a front-runner position, actually to protect that. I have to say one thing about the cities. You know, sometimes, and I acknowledge all the things going on in the cities, all the things going on in front-runner businesses, but sometimes you get the impression that we don't need the states, because it's sort of happening automatically. Sorry, I don't subscribe to that. Because I can just see that what is it that drives the cities, what drives the businesses, that is because they also know that our state has this and that target, they have this and that policy, we can as well get out and start getting something done. I mean, if the whole thing fall apart, in Paris, for instance, no international things moving, some few front runners, they would continue to be front runners, but a lot would just lean back and say, I don't have to do a thing. So there is some kind of interaction between the different levels. We should not underestimate that.
Then, Simon, pitch to us the smart city. What does it look like? I mean, if it's going to be attractive, make us feel good about saying, I was in Samsung, what does it look like?
Well, I think the important thing to understand about smart cities is that it's different things to different cities, and it has to be different things to different cities. No, it sounds like a cliche, but no city is the same. You know, we have archetypes of cities, and you might lump Aarhus and Copenhagen into a similar archetype of city on a global level, but clearly Aarhus and Copenhagen are fundamentally different cities, with different needs, with different populations, with different demographic segments, and with different challenges and different political regimes. Right? So the temptation is to define smart cities technically by the technologies that are implemented in the execution of a smart city. Smart grid,
but you
smart
have to
water,
find a
smart
catchphrase,
transportation.
don't you, to sell it. You talked about finding the right words when you sort of advertise it. You have to find that catchphrase, don't you?
But I guess the point that I'm getting to, which is really, really important, is when we define what a smart city is, if we are tempted to define it by the technology, we completely miss the boat, right? Because politicians could care less about what technology you implement in the service of a smart city. What a smart city should be doing is looking at the city, identifying where the pinch points are for communities. What is the pain that is felt on a day-to-day basis in your city? Is it about commuting? Is it about energy consumption? Is it about water resource scarcity? And then targeting technology at developing solutions with good design to those known problems. And to give you like a really, really specific example of where that needs to be done better, is, you know, in the implementation of water resource scarcity, we should be focusing on how, not necessarily the smart water technology, but how you create the incentives for taking in lower power or low technology, you know, shower heads that reduce water consumption. It doesn't have to be a high-tech solution. It can be a technological solution which deploys the least amount of technology to deliver the right outcome in terms of social and behavioral change.
I love how you boiled smart cities down to a shower head.
It's as simple as that, right? But it doesn't have to be about technology in the traditional sense of what smart technology is, right?
I think in the contemporary technological world, it's smart to be smart and it's unnecessary to be dumb. That's kind of a standard idea. And this goes for everything. It goes for your heating system in your house, right? So there was this really interesting comment again by Mads in the previous talk where he said, well, actually Grundfos should be about providing solutions, not just pumps. And he gave us an example that it's really clever to be able to circulate the water so that you have warm water when you go in your shower and you don't need to let the water running at first. Now I have a system like that, but it keeps running also at night and also when I'm not at home, etc. That's not really smart. So there are clever ways to keep smarting up these kind of things here. And I think this is where we are going to see a lot of the technological developments now. It's not necessarily disruptive technologies that redefine how we take a shower, but it might be a matter of combining those things that are already available in novel ways. And this is something that Denmark, for instance, is really suitable for because systems are so well coordinated. So you can do smart things quite simply.
Would it be nice if it's something I can brag about? hey, I've
Yeah.
got this great new shower head.
Absolutely. Yes, this is what, some people brag about the new shower head, others don't, but I'm sure designers
They
can come
may
up
brag
with
about
clever
the new
things.
Tesla. But
Your new Tesla might do the job, right?
now, I've been waiting for that question to go up to the top. Now it is. What can I do that matters? Who wants to take a crack at that?
I'll definitely take a first crack. I mean, for me, there are two things that matter. Be a more responsible consumer. Consume for quality, not for quantity. And the second is be politically engaged and active at a grassroots level, right? Not just at the national level, but at your community level. Agitate, engage, and coordinate proactive action in relation to your local environment. Focus on your local environment, focus on your community, and help others to make better decisions about the way that they consume, the way that they travel, the way that they live their daily life, and work as a community to do that.
You're almost saying that everyone, I may be getting you the wrong way here, but everyone could be a leader then, leading by example.
Everyone should be a leader in their community.
Easier said than done, probably, but
it's a state of mind.
No, but Paul Erik, as citizens, we are consumers and we are voters. And every day we are making a lot of choices. If we each decided that we are much more conscious about those choices we are making in our consumption, as someone is saying, that would mean a difference. I mean, if 500 million Europeans started daily to send that kind of signals to those producing the goods that we buy, that would make a difference. If every time there was an election campaign, each of us actually showed up at the town hall or wherever and put these kind of agendas up for question, I mean, it can make a difference. But there is this tendency that was not reflected before, but somebody else must take care of this.
But do you think
we
we're
have
doing
an
it?
enormous
do you
power
think we're
as
doing
consumers.
it already? We're
Sorry?
not doing it. We're not doing it, are we?
Well, I'm not sure. And now I'm working for the Norwegian government right now. They are, and I was in Norway the other day. And they asked a group like this, "How many of you do have an electric car?" And half of the fingers went up. And that is, of
But
course,
they paid
a
for that
deliberate
with oil
choice.
money, didn't they?
And they are subsidizing it. But it's an example how, through the right economic schemes and the right political framework, you can make people, even in Norway, I mean, it's not logic that electrical cars with a low range should have their biggest market in Norway. But people want to do it if they are not treated as economic idiots by doing the right stuff.
I mean, I would completely agree with everything the two distinguished speakers said, and also add then that, shame and pride and guilt is not primarily something in ourselves, it's really in others as well. It's really also about enforcing values out there, and we do this by discussing with each other what's okay, what's not okay. Shame those companies out that don't behave properly, do these kind of things. It's really about creating also a public sphere where these are things to be taken seriously, because that creates kind of the landscape within which we make our choices. And I think this is really where we can make the hugest differences right now.
So it's just like we're brought up, not throwing our waste around. We just know that. We just know you don't do that.
Well, if you look at the streets in Aarhus, you can sometimes think
I
whether
know,
we still
I
do
know.
that.
But we know it's wrong, right?
But this is what sociality is about, right? It's also about enforcing and kind of shifting each other and saying, is this okay or is this not okay?
Right. Let's move on to one of these other questions here. Where was it? Oh, it's gone. There was a question before that I kind of liked, and it's my choice, right? It's not a democratic thing here. Can we do this without lowering our living standards?
I would say yes, if we start now. But the longer we wait, the more drastic the consequences for our lifestyle as we know it. I think we have a long global history, decades after decades. I mean, we have shown that we can get more out of less. We can become more efficient. We have technological developments. There are lots of things that can be done, but it's clear that if we wait 20 years, 30 years down the line to actually start to do things at the bigger scale, then we cannot. And that is what people really need to understand. That is what the American politicians that we were talking about before need to understand, because they have said since the 1990s in Kyoto, the American lifestyle is not up for negotiation. No, but if you don't act, then it will be up for drastic changes. And that's what we need to understand. That to continue business as usual will not give us business as usual. It will give us a lot of change, but change that we haven't planned ourselves. And that's why it is wise to start now, because then we can do it gradually.
I think the really interesting question for me is, how do we deal with the challenge of the emerging middle class in developing economies and their expectations of reaching the same standards of living that we see in the Western world? And how do we maintain sustainability whilst allowing those people to have the right to achieve the same standards of living that we've achieved in our countries? And for me, that's the bigger challenge. Not how do we maintain our standard of living, but how do we allow those people to maintain or to achieve the same standards of living that we are lucky enough to accept without bankrupting the planet? And that is the critical challenge. Is we can't turn around in COP21 and tell developing nations that somehow they have to stunt their growth aspirations. That is a politically unacceptable solution, and it's morally unacceptable. So for me, that's the critical challenge. And from a business perspective, it's also the best opportunity. How do we allow those emerging middle class people to achieve the same standard of living?
But with all
and
due
also
respect, I
sell
think
those
most
products?
people are concerned with their own living standards.
Yeah, but you would as well if you were in Malaysia.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Sure.
But if you were earning $10,000 a year in Malaysia and you wanted to be earning $50,000 a year, that would be your concern. And it would be their concern as much as it is our concern. So for me, the question is less about how do I maintain my standard of living, it's the question about how do I allow other people to attain the same standard of living as me.
Without polluting
Without bankrupting the planet.
Yeah, right.
It's a really difficult thing to measure standards of living, right? What's a high standard of living? I don't think we can do this without changing our ways of living, our standards of living in that sense.
I would think GDP.
Yeah, but
That would be my first thought.
Okay, but I think GDP, you can do a lot of things.
Says more
with
about
GDP,
me, maybe, but still.
And I think the GDP note does not need to be changed. It might mean that you have 3 cars or 2 cars instead of 1 car, because you might need kind of 1 car for your everyday life and other ways of getting by on a long-term scale. That might not be owned. Is that a higher or lower standard of living? That's an open question. But I don't think we can do it without changing our way of living. But maybe that's an okay thing. Sometimes change is okay. Sometimes it actually empowers you, and it gives you a feeling that there are things that could be done differently. I think that's the more interesting question.
But do you have examples of people who have just changed their ways of living as societies? What would that be? What would you equate it to? What would be the parallel here?
To people changing their styles of living? I have a lot of kind of friends now who sees their kids moving out of home, and they decide, well, maybe actually they don't need to live that kind of life in a huge house that they had previously. One of them has taken a drastic decision and moved basically into a small camping wagon to see what is it like to do this. Is that reducing the standard of living?
But
yes,
as a society, don't we have to do that as a society?
But these things work through people, don't they? So I'm not too concerned about
one
that.
by one makes up the group.
And if you look at things like the energy consumption, we have changed the way that we consume energy in Denmark quite radically through a lot of different initiatives. So the energy budget has gone down. Has that changed or diminished our way of living? I don't think so.
But take cars. It's sort of a norm that we want to own our own cars. For the first time in history, the number of young Americans who own their own cars is going down. That has something to do with urbanization and different lifestyles and so on and so forth to do. I think we will see more of that. It's not for sure that all 1.2, 1.3 billion Indians all will have to own their cars. Maybe it's enough to have the access to use a car. And that will mean something for the whole sort of resource component in all these things. So I think that we are discussing this in a sort of static way, because I think that there are some new ownership models coming up where it's not so much about owning things as having the access to use them. And that will change the way we produce things and the way we price things.
Now I would like to get that first question, actually the second one, it was first a moment ago. So I think I would like Ditlev Engel to just say what you mean by this, if we can get a microphone. But in the meantime, if you don't mind, I think the last question there, Connie, what is the reason Norway lies ahead of Denmark and Europe in general, I guess it means, when it comes to electric cars?
Very much, because they've decided so and they are subsidizing it heavily. For sure, no discussion about that, but of course that's only a temporary thing until they have changed the way they drive and until they have the whole infrastructure in place which they are building now.
Right.
So they have been sort of a test laboratory for electric cars worldwide.
That is answer. Would you just tell us what you mean by this? What is it? License to operate.
Yeah. Well, there's from the discussion on Monday when we talked about who's going to drive this, business or politicians, as one of your questions were previously. And basically what I said was, I cannot see successful companies going forward creating value without having this embedded in whatever they do. I mean, and I think that's why it's going to be a license to operate. You will not create shareholder value. If you look at a lot of funds right now, that they're creating more value in green funds than black funds, and therefore the key question is really to understand that this is a license to operate. It's not a luxury, a CSR report. If you don't have it, you won't go there. And when President Obama came with his Clean Power Plan a few weeks ago, he had 158 of the largest American companies co-signing it. So if you are a supplier to them, you better understand this, otherwise you will not continue to be a supplier.
So you're saying companies are already there, they're already taking responsibility. They don't need new incentives or?
But I think we just have to remember that the world looks very different depending on where you are. And the growth is going to be in Asia for the global middle class. And if you cannot breathe, you don't have kind of the luxury who should drive this. You will be very interested in supporting brands and companies that take this seriously. And therefore the key issue is really, if you don't take it seriously, you're going to be run out of business. And I mean, and as I said at that time, you know, let's remember that we did not abandon child labor because we ran out of kids. This is kind of the same thing. It is just no longer fashionable to pollute. So you will have to be serious about it if you want to be successful and create value.
Andreas, that is very important, isn't it? No longer fashionable to pollute.
But I can only
is that the most important thing then?
No, I think I can only completely agree that it's really about kind of an understanding of how is it okay to relate to the world, to relate to the environment and relate to each other. This is important, and it's really interesting if companies are picking this up really quickly, right?
Any comment? Any other?
I agree.
I think the license to operate question is inherently related to the question of trust. And the bond between the consumer and the corporation is all about trust. And do the consumers trust in the product and the ethics and the values of that company? And I think you're absolutely right. I think going forward, there'll be a very clear relationship, call it a license to operate if you will, that is driven by that bond of trust between the consumer and the producer. I think also there is a license to operate question in relation to government, more formal license to operate condition if you're a monopoly service provider or if you're a regulated utility, where it's a much more legal set of constraints as to what you do and how you do it. And I think we will increasingly see a much more legal license to operate around certain industries that are related to environmental performance.
But trust is important. You cannot do a Volkswagen here.
No, exactly. Could I just mention one thing with the Volkswagen thing, because I think that how unfortunate that case is, I think that will change things more dramatically. I mean, if you're a car producer now, you're a competitor to Volkswagen, you are definitely going down your whole production chain right now to find out how can you avoid to sort of be named and shamed.
Every bit of code in your computers.
Sorry?
Every bit of code in your
Every
computers.
bit of code. So I think it will have a longer term sort of repercussions on the way business think about that, because they can see the reputational risk of being caught in not doing what you preach.
Yeah. So just to finish the point that I was raising before, just on that license to operate place. Yes, there's a license to operate between the consumer and the producer. There's a license to operate between government and the company in terms of the legal constraints. But there's also a license to operate between the shareholder and the executive team. And the expectations or license to operate for the executive team is to deliver shareholder value. And sometimes we're seeing conflict between those three different requirements: the legal constraints, the shareholder value constraints, and the consumer constraints. And where we get into problems is where the governance is in conflict. And that's why I think actually the Danish model is very interesting, and why we might well see evolutions in corporate governance where longer term environmental incentives, so the B Corp type structure as you see in the US, which gives companies more flexibility between shareholder value creation and environmental and social value creation, allowing corporates to get out of that short-term profit incentive requirement and say, well, actually, there's a longer-term play here where I need to balance my license to operate as a good corporate citizen,
and not just
as well as short-term performance production.
You got a remark?
Yeah, because maybe the most disruptive technologies in this field is not really the windmills or the pumps, but has to do with the social technologies that allows us to communicate in completely new ways. And I think the Volkswagen case is a wonderful one. You know, as an anthropologist, I would have loved to be in the room where they discussed why could it be a clever idea to come up with this really clever software. And my imagination is that someone will say, you know, actually, we're not really cheating because we are just allowing it to perform in particular ways at that particular time when it is being tested. And we show that the car can behave like that. And we have just been really clever in figuring that out. And somehow, you know, they must have agreed with each other that this is almost okay, right, from one perspective. And what just happens when it comes out into a global sphere is that that argument just completely falls apart. So in interesting ways, really the communication and the ability to get things out into an open evaluation means that some of these things that can make a lot of sense within, let's say, an engineering perspective, just becomes impossible. So that, from that perspective, the disruptive technologies here is really the possibility to create a large sphere of communication about what's okay and what's not okay. And Volkswagen is seeing the largest shitstorm ever for it, and they deserved it. But it's a pity because there has been a company that has really been advancing car technologies.
Well, I saw somebody writing that that at least Volkswagen could be proud of making 11 million cars work the exact same way. Now, we're running out of time in this panel. Just one last thought, a very, I think, journalist question, which is, in 10 years' time, would we even be having this kind of debate? Or have we moved on then? I don't know is okay.
No, I think, you know, you can see this from many perspectives. But basically, if I look 10 years back and how things have moved over the last 10 years in business, in cities, in states, where it's not any longer sort of just for environment and climate people to take care of, a lot of things have happened. I mean, today you cannot meet a mayor from a major European city or just a middle-sized European city who will not know about his climate policies in the municipality. You could easily have done that 10 years ago. You cannot meet a CEO from a decent sort of big company today that will not know about his carbon footprint. So I'm not that pessimistic. It's not going to be a walk in the park. It's not going to be easy. But I really think that things are dawning on people, and we are moving sort of down a trajectory that will mean that 10 years from now we will still be discussing this, and we will still be discussing what is the most cost-efficient way and what to do next, but we will not be debating whether this is actually the way we are going to pursue.
Yeah, in 10 years' time, I don't think we're going to be having mitigation discussions. I don't think we're going to be talking about mitigation as a subject and energy efficiency and electromobility. It will just happen, right? And you know, electrification of mass transit and electric vehicles and self-driving vehicles will be here in 10 years, and we won't be having that discussion. It'll be a question of what are the implications. I think that in 10 years, the two discussions we're going to be having is adaptation and resilience of our infrastructure. You know, do we need to invest more in making sure that we're more resilient? And the second is we're going to be having a jobs discussion, which is what are the implications of the advances of AI and robotics, and how are we going to re-employ all those taxi drivers that are no longer taxi drivers, and how are we going to deal with the reskilling of the population, and what's the role of the nation state, what's the role of the city, and what's the role of the corporation.
So you could have a lot of political conflict clashes there.
So I think it's going to be a labor question. It's not going to be an environmental question.
That's going to be interesting as a reporter. at least.
No, I mean,
Andreas?
I think also in 10 years' time, the importance of the topic will be at place, but I think what we will
Well,
be...
we have moved as people.
Yeah, but I think what we will be struggling with is how drastic measures do we need to take in order to kind of not develop into an even more gloomy future. I think this is going to be the worry, and if we don't act really rapidly now, I fear that in 10 years' time the discussions can become quite nasty, and not just about should we do a subtle shift towards electrical cars, but about something fundamentally different. And I think this is what I'm fearing for 10 years ahead.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Thank you. It's a real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Andreas Roepstorff. Thank you, Connie Hedegaard. And thank you, Simon Giles, for an interesting debate and for sharing your thoughts on climate and technology.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much as well, Paul Erik Skammelsen, for moderating this debate and for your contribution to Aarhus Symposium 2015.
My pleasure. Thank you.